Never in the history of humanity has compliance and cowardice and simply just doing what you're told been heroic and virtuous, except during COVID. Don't question. Just do exactly what you're told. You're a hero now. Absolutely ludicrous, but it worked. It worked because a lot of people were looking for any excuse to comply because, just like I said, I didn't want any of the attention, so I know exactly how everybody else felt. But it needed to be done, and it still needs to be done because they haven't stopped. This entire COVID operation was literally to prime you for what they're doing now with the climate change agenda, because they knew the average person wasn't going to say, oh, I'll give up my car and give up my house and give up my traveling around the world for the good of the climate. Nobody cared. No one thinks you're actually going to die if you don't stop eating meat in 30 years. Nobody believes that crap. So they can't get you to go along with it. They can't get you to volunteer. But with COVID, oh my gosh, now if you didn't go along with it, you're killing grandma, you're killing babies. They're making you feel as guilty as possible. There was two fundamental things they wanted to do with COVID. The first one being to get rid of the notion that individual rights and freedoms are paramount to a successful society, which we know is reality because we've had world wars and millions of people fighting and dying to preserve individual rights and freedoms. That's how important they have been to society. But in COVID, within just a few weeks, individual rights and freedoms were not just no longer paramount to a successful society, they were selfish and dangerous. And those who would fight for rights and freedoms were not patriotic, they were not heroes, now they were domestic terrorists. That was a huge, huge fundamental shift in human thought and human consciousness that they perpetrated on the entire world after generations and generations of believing one way within a few months, weeks, in fact, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. It took them that's all it took to reprogram billions and billions of people to now loathe rights and freedoms and attack those that were trying to protect their rights and freedoms. The second thing that they needed to do was to get rid of the notion of individual responsibility, because individual responsibility leads to independence. Independence leads to freedom. So they need you to get used to the idea of collective responsibility. It's straight out of every communist playbook, straight out of every Marxist playbook. This way, now the government and everybody else are partially responsible for every decision you make. So now the government's involved in every aspect of your life. Nobody would have agreed to this except with COVID. So now, 2 years later, we went from a society where individual rights and freedoms were paramount to a successful society to now rights and freedoms are selfish and dangerous. And we went to the fact that, sorry, you just hit my foot there. And we went to the fact that we have collective responsibility. So now I need to wear my mask to protect you. You need to wear your mask to protect grandma. We're all in this together. That whole garbage bullshit. And what does that prime us for? That primes us perfectly for the next phase of programming, which is the climate change agenda. Because a pandemic can only last for so many years. The climate change agenda can last for generations. And in order for you to accept and volunteer for climate change servitude, we needed to get rid of the notion of individual rights and freedoms, and we needed to install the notion of collective responsibility. So now the next phase is 15-minute cities, personal carbon allowances, and people write those words down, digital IDs, digital currency. I use those as one basically because they're going to come out almost together. And then finally, they're going to connect this all with a universal basic income that people are going to require because they're going to use a combination of an increase in cost of living due to inflation highly outpacing wages and supplemental income, combined with a whole new system of taxing you in the name of saving the planet. So now we're at phase 3. Individual rights and freedoms are selfish and dangerous. And now you have to give them up, not for your health and safety and not just temporarily because of a pandemic. Now you have to give them up forever and for the good of so-called Mother Earth. See how they tiptoe you to tyranny? It's always one step at a time. And so how do people think that this collectivism is really this dangerous? And why are 15-minute cities so dangerous? And how are they going to tie in the carbon and climate scam into this? Well, as you saw, everybody tells you a 15-minute city means that everything you need is going to be a 15-minute walk or bike ride. Why don't they mention cars? Because the whole purpose of a 15-minute city is to eliminate cars. If you see any renderings of what a 15-minute city is supposed to look like, you'll notice there's two things, or there's not two things. You'll notice no single-family dwellings with garages anywhere, only mixed-use buildings where you have commercial at the bottom and residential on top, because they want you to live and work in the same building, so you don't even have to leave the building for most of your life, let alone leave the block or your 15-minute city district. And that's what they want. That's really bad. Yeah, I know. And so sorry, go ahead. You were going to say something?
Well, no, you finish that thought because I got another question.
The other thing you're not going to see in their renderings are cars anywhere. You're going to see people on bikes, scooters. You're going to see public transit. And there's a reason for this. If you look up 15-minute city in Google and define what it is, the very first thing that every single publication will admit is that the primary purpose of a 15-minute city is to reduce the individual's carbon footprint. Now, in North America, 99, whoever has a car, that is your number one thing that creates the most of your carbon footprint, your car. So in order to reduce the individual carbon footprint, the fastest, most efficient method is to reduce the number of people who own cars. So to do that, you're going to do things like get rid of car lanes, introduce bike lanes, get rid of single-family houses, introduce these big buildings. They're also getting rid of parking lots. When they have new developments, instead of minimum amounts of parking, they have maximum amount of parking. All the lanes that do end up still allowing you to drive cars on them, they make them ultra low emissions roads. So you'll only be able to drive cars on them if you have an electric car. So eventually, the only people that are going to be driving are Ubers, government vehicles, ambulances, government themselves, because they're essential and they're exempt, or anybody who's rich enough to have one of these cars. So already they're going to eliminate vehicle traffic from about 75 to 80% of you by 2030. That's the goal. They want 8 out of 10 people in the city to no longer have an automobile. And that means you're not going to be traveling very far, because if you only have a bike, scooter, or public transit to rely on, that's why they're creating these so-called 15-minute districts. They literally call them districts, straight out of the Hunger Games. And if you want to know how they're going to keep you in your district, just look at Oxford, England. I was in England in September, one of the many countries I spoke in. I got to speak to people who live in Oxford as the literal model of the 15-minute city for the around the world was being implemented. In Oxford, England, they now have 6 separate districts. These districts are separated by physical barricades with actual bollards, and they also have traffic cameras that will scan your license plate and fine you if you try to drive through to the other district. You're only allowed to leave your district up to 100 days per year under this plan, and only at certain times. And if you do, right now you get a fine. How long will it be till you get arrested or killed, like in Hunger Games? Right now, they're also telling you if you want to leave when you're not allowed, you have to get special government permission to leave your district. So they're trying to tell you, oh, that's just Oxford, England, but that's not going to happen here. Meanwhile, they have now expanded that to all other parts of the UK. While they are rioting in the streets, while they voted, 94% of the public voted no against these measures, the government still is implementing them, for your own good. And now they've already announced in Canada, 15-minute cities, Edmonton, Vancouver, Toronto, Ottawa, even smaller places like Kitchener, and even really smaller places like Guelph are all doing this. And there's no need to do it. They're doing it because they're being paid to do it. So they're getting all these federal dollars to implement these so-called measures, and they're putting that money in their pocket. So they're basically getting international money from the World Economic Forum, paid to our crony politicians to push and implement these agendas against the will of the people, against the best interests of the people. So once you have your 15-minute city set up with the physical barricades, the cameras, and they have it set up so you can only go out of your district at certain times a year, how else do you think they're going to keep you there? The next levels of tyranny are psychological and financial. So now we're going to have something, the most propaganda you're ever going to see. You want a prediction? Here's a prediction. A massive multi-billion-dollar propaganda campaign over the next months to year that's going to push people to voluntarily track their carbon footprint. That is going to be the biggest thing you see.
They already have an app for that, Chris? Hold on, before you even go on there, I just want to bring this up because this is I started with the title. The 15-minute city freakout is a case study in conspiracy paranoia. Far-right protesters in the UK claim that Oxford's traffic control plan is part of a global authoritarian plot. What the heck is going on? I just want to get down to this part here. At issue, I mean, this is after they've primed you to believe it's a conspiracy theory. At issue was the proposed introduction of 6 new traffic filters. I don't like that. Hold on here. Intended to limit car use through residential parts of the city at peak hours. Monitored by automatic license plate readers, these filters would find drivers from outside the county of Oxfordshire who entered central areas during high traffic periods. Oxford residents will be allowed fine-free peak hour access for 100 days per year, with residents of the wider county able to apply for a 25-day fine-free access permit. It's a conspiracy theory, but
it's a conspiracy theory that's exactly as I explained it, right down to the 100 days that you're allowed to leave at the certain times they say, and right down to you having to obtain special permission if you want to leave at another time.